Hello everyone, welcome to Word of Hope. Let's take a look at our first lesson for this Sunday from the book of 1 Kings chapter 19. It's maybe a familiar account for you, Elijah and talking with the Lord. 1 Kings 19, here's a very profound thought. 1 Kings 19 comes after 1 Kings 18. What happens in 1 Kings 18 is Elijah has this great confrontation with the prophets of Baal at Mount Carmel. 450 prophets of Baal, one prophet of the Lord. He challenges them to a duel. Do you remember the story? Both build an altar, both put a bull on the altar, both pray to their God that their God should light that offering. Prophets of Baal go first, nothing happens. Elijah builds his altar, he puts the bull on it, he puts the wood on it, he digs a trench around it, and he dumps water on it, so much so that the wood and the bull and the stones, the exterior of the stones are saturated, are wet, and even so much so that their water fills up the little trough around them. Elijah prays, and God answers in grand, glorious fashion. Fire comes down from heaven and lights the offering on fire, burns up the offering, burns up the wood, consumes the stone, and licks up the water. And everybody says, what should we do? And Elijah says, kill the prophets of Baal. So the 450 prophets of Baal are killed. And then something happens. Elijah is expecting there to be a groundswell of support for himself and for the Lord, and it doesn't happen. In fact, all that this does is it emboldens Ahab and Jezebel. Ahab was the king of Israel, Jezebel the queen, to further drive people away from the Lord. 1 Kings chapter 19, Ahab tells Jezebel everything Elijah had done. Jezebel sends a message to Elijah, you're going to be dead by tomorrow. So Elijah is looking for, as I said, a groundswell of support for the Lord, perhaps Ahab and Jezebel to be removed, overthrown, and a godly king and queen put on the place, but it just doesn't happen. And so Elijah says, what was this all about? I'm all alone. So Elijah runs for his life. He goes to a place called Beersheba in Judah. He leaves his servant there, and he goes a little bit further, and then Elijah says, I've had enough. I'm done fighting. I don't know what more I can do. He lay down under a bush and fell asleep. The Lord touches him. He gives him food. He gives him water. Elijah is physically nourished. He touches him, and he tells him to go to Mount Horeb. Mount Horeb is also known as Mount Moriah. Mount Moriah is also known as Mount Zion. Mount Zion is also known as Jerusalem. So God tells Elijah to go to this special place, Mount Horeb, where God's presence has been seen through centuries, going all the way back to David and Abraham too, Mount Moriah. But anyway, God says, I want you to go to Mount Horeb, and then there's that episode where God appears 3 times to Elijah. First of all, there's the wind. He's not in the wind. Then there's the earthquake. He's not in the earthquake. Then there's a fire. He's not in the fire. And then, literally in the Hebrew, it says the sound of gentle stillness. And in the sound of gentle stillness, God appears and tells Elijah that he's not alone, that he will have support. God will raise up another prophet named Elisha, and there will be a new leader in Israel and in Judah. And so there's a couple of takeaways from this. One takeaway is that God's grandest scheme, God's greatest expression of control, of guidance, is seen not in grand cataclysmic events like Elijah at Mount Carmel, not seen in wind and storm and fire, but he's seen in the gospel, the sound of gentle stillness. That's where we see God best. That's where we see his love for us. That's where we see his compassion for us. That's where ultimately we are motivated and strengthened to lead lives pleasing to God. From there we go to the book of Ephesians 4:17 through 5:2. Paul continues in his exhortation. Remember, chapters 4, 5, and 6 is practical application of the truths that he details in chapters 1 through 3, which is, this is what God has done for you. So in chapter 4, he says, this is how you live. This is how you act. He very plainly says, I insist on it. This is the paradigm. This is the template in which you are to live. Paul says in verse 22, you were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires. Here's the truth. We are walking civil wars. We are born in a sinful condition, and when we are born in a sinful condition, we are opposed to God in all that is good and right and pure and just. The Holy Spirit comes into our lives. He creates faith in us, so we have this new self and old self. The old self is guided by sin. The new self is guided by the Holy Spirit. So there is this constant civil war that is always going on in us. And Paul says, each and every day we put off our old self. That is, each and every day we rise up again, reminded that we are redeemed, holy, precious children of God, bought and purchased with the price of Christ's blood. And that guiding influence influences us in our day and in our time. So not because of what I have done or not done, but each and every day I am a new child of Jesus Christ. Paul gives some good advice in verse 26. Don't let the sun go down while you are still angry. This is a wonderful passage for interpersonal relationships. Sometimes it is good to let heads cool before you talk about an issue that has caused some strife between you and your loved one. But ultimately, if it really is an issue that is causing you pain and consternation, then it needs to be resolved. Or you need to get rid of it. So in our lives, when we have trials and troubles, difficulties with people that we love in our lives, we always have to make two choices. One choice is, okay, it's not a big deal. It's about me, and I maybe would do this differently. That person is doing it that way, whatever. Or if it really is an issue of that causes consternation and you can't let it go, then you need to resolve it. You need to work it through. Paul says, get rid of bitterness, rage, anger, brawling, and slander. Bitterness is a spirit that rejects reconciliation, bitterness. So hanging on to past wrongs and past hurts and being unwilling to let it go. Rage is outbursts of anger. That's why we call it road rage. Everything is seemingly calm and wonderful, and then there's one issue that happens and there is an outburst of rage. Anger refers to a continuous state. So kind of like a slow boil of you might just always be upset and ready to blow, expressing itself in rage. A brawling, a continuous state of loud assertiveness that you are always right. That's what brawling means, to constantly believe that you are in the right. Now, you might be right, right? You might always be right. That's true. But really what Paul is getting at is the manner in which we convey that mindset to others. Slander, of course, is speaking negatively about someone else to your own advantage. What should we be filled with? We should be kind, compassionate, and forgiving. Kind is acting benevolently. Compassionately is to be tender-hearted, to have a heart that is motivated by God's tenderness through Christ, and forgiving. What is forgiving? Forgiving is different from reconciliation. Reconciliation is where you are sitting down, talking to someone who has wronged you. Both of you are sharing your pains and sorrows, and both of you admit that you are wrong, and both of you say, I apologize, and both of you say, I forgive you. Forgiveness is really between us and God. So when we have been wronged by someone, we need to forgive other people because maybe they're not willing to sit down with us. When we are unwilling to forgive, that is what leads to bitterness in our lives, when we strive to hang on to the hurt and wrong that has been perpetuated against us. Somebody once says, if you forgive, you need to forget. The Bible never says that. I think when someone has truly been hurt, been wronged, been wounded, to say you need to forget isn't realistic. God can forget. God doesn't look at our past sins and past wrongs, but we're not God. We're emotional creatures. And we remember. So forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is no longer allowing what that person did to influence and guide us in our lives. Chapter 5 then begins, therefore, because of what we are, because of what we have become, this is what we will do. We will walk in love, and the love that we have is Christ's love for us in Jesus Christ. From there we go to the gospel. John chapter 6, one of the I am statements of Jesus, I am the bread of life. Bread is a simple, basic sustenance. We can't operate without food and water. So Jesus says, when Jesus says, I am the bread of life, he says, I am the essential building block of your spiritual formation. The context behind this is a little bit earlier. Jesus feeds the 5,000. Jesus tries to withdraw. He goes to one side of the lake, or goes to the other side of the lake. They go around the lake. Some other people get in boats and follow Jesus. They say, hey, Jesus, give us more of this food. You know, Moses kept feeding the people for 40 years. You only did it once. And Jesus says, well, this is what I truly have to offer, not a physical food, but a spiritual food. I am the bread of life. And they grumble. In verse 41, we see that they grumble and complain because they say, he can't be God. This is Jesus. Joseph is Joseph's son and the brother of the people that we know, James and Justus. So they begin to reject him. So what does Jesus say again in verse 48? I am the bread of life. So he begins this section with that exhortation, I am the bread of life. He closes it, I am the bread of life. I am the basic building block of your spiritual formation. When we eat of this bread, we will live forever. This bread is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world. So one question is Jesus talking about communion here? He certainly could be, most likely not though, because communion hasn't been instituted. The point that Jesus is talking about when he says that he's the bread of life is he is underscoring the truth that in him there's complete and total fulfillment and there is sustenance in our daily life. That's the Bible lesson for this week. God bless you. Have a wonderful week. You see you next time.